Hello, welcome to the hardest game. My name is Ben Doughty, and I am resolutely without either of the guests I was expecting to have this evening. I was hoping to be joined by my good friend and erstwhile constant sidekick, Gary Stretch, who is in London town for a movie premiere for The Wheels of Heaven and his fine performance in said movie, which premiered at the Genesis Cinema in Stepney Green last night. So I did see him. Hopefully Gary will still come on, but all I know is he's not here now, and it's 9 o'clock, and on we go. The show must go on. I also hope to be joined earlier today by former WBO featherweight champion Colin McMillan, who some of you might know is a team member of Hamza Shiraz's setup. And I wanted to talk to him about the controversial draw. What's happening? It's Mr. Makeover. Not sure who Mr. Makeover is, but how's it going? I'm sure it's Sorry, it actually doesn't say makeover. It says McCave. I'll figure it out. Um, yeah, I wanted to talk to Colin McMillan and get his insights on the controversial draw that Hamza Shiraz received in his WBC title challenge versus Carlos Adames. Most people were of the opinion that Adames was robbed, the defending champion as he was. I don't go. Oh, Scott McAvoy, what's happening, man? Good to see you, Scott. I'm glad you're in the house, Scott, because you're the only one who is so far. As I was explaining when the show opened, I was hoping to have Gary Stretch here. Perhaps he will turn up at some point because he's been known to come in 10 minutes late sometimes. And I was hoping to have Colin McMillan to talk about the controversial draw with Carlos Adames. Since I've started on that subject, maybe I should press on with it. I do feel there was an element that Shiraz had somewhat frozen on the biggest stage of his life, on the biggest night of his life to date. Having said that, he broke his left hand, which if that happens, you've got to you've got to contend with it, haven't you? It's all very well for us to sit on the sidelines watching it and saying that he froze and he didn't let his hands go, but if you've broken one of your hands, then it's a big problem, and it's a big problem for him no matter which one it was, really, because if you break your lead hand, that's a big problem because whatever Michael Asilkalajale says, the jab is the most important tool you've got in there. It's your mainstay. I don't want to say bread and butter because I'll sound like one of those cab driver boxing coaches. No offense to boxing coaches who are already or also cab drivers, by the way. I know a few, so I don't want to blackball myself with that particular crowd, especially not Dave Stewart, actually. He's not actually a boxing trainer, but I believe former British title challenger Dave Stewart will be listening to this as we speak, hopefully. He's a cab driver, so consider that comment struck from the record. But the jab is important, right? Usually important. If you haven't got it, I still believe whatever Michael Elijah says. I still believe if you've broken your right hand, your rear hand, let's say I'm an orthodox boxer, yeah. If I break that, I can get through the fight, jabbing and hooking and touching, moving. Maybe I can get through the fight with this lead hand. To get through just with my backhand, I don't think that works. That's my. I could have the argument with Michael Elijah all day, and I probably would do, and we argue on every single subject it seems lately, and there's literally no reasoning with the cyclopean maverick. But no, so Hamza Shiraz broke his hand, which obviously may explain why he was so conservative, and didn't really put it on the line. I don't believe in that axiom which says that you have to rip it away from the champion. I don't believe that at all. I think you've just got to win a boxing match scored with integrity and neutrality, the same as you would score a four-rounder at your call. You apply the same value base to a championship fight in Riyadh, on the biggest card, what some people are calling the greatest card of this century, or some people are even calling it the greatest card of any boxing century in the gloved era. But no. One thing I'm going to stress throughout this show, fellas, is I didn't score any of the fights live. I don't know about you. I don't like to score all the time. I will score, sometimes. Because I think it's going to be important and people are going to ask me how I scored it. And I never want to give a verdict unless I scored it round by round. You cannot just base your opinion on an. You can have an opinion, but you can't have any concrete opinion unless you scored it round by round because all you're getting then is an overall impression. And can you imagine if the judges ever said, if a judge didn't turn in a card and he just said, I didn't score it, but I watched it, and I think that fella won. You want him strung up from the nearest lamppost. So when people say, including Michael Sukalajale, by the way, when people say I watched it and I formed an opinion, and if you know how to watch a fight, then you know who won. That's not good enough. So I didn't score it, but yes, Shiraz looked fortunate. He looked lucky. Much has been made of his relationship with Turkey Al Sheikh and the fact that Hamza Shiraz is an ambassador for Riyadh season and all the rest of it because he's a fellow Muslim. So I think it's fair to say you got a squeeze, and it looks like they're going to do it again. You would think. I did hear somebody suggest that Shiraz might be struggling at 160 pounds, and he may move up. But I believe we'll probably see the rematch because there was a draw, and one might expect it to get mandated. I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to say about that particular fight, but if you don't, and since Colin McMillan was unable to join us this evening, perhaps I'll move on elsewhere on the card. I want to talk about Daniel Dubois because obviously we've seen the internet conspiracy massive suggesting that there was something disingenuous about his withdrawal 2 days before the fight was scheduled to take place. What they're suggesting is that they didn't fancy it. He or they got cold feet at the last minute, thought that Parker was a potential banana skin, thought that he would jeopardize what is projected to be a fight with for the undisputed championship with Alexander Usyk next time out. Usyk has been making noises he would like to face Dubois next time out. And by the way, don't get me started on that whole thing. It would be, in my mind, it would be for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world because that is who Alexander Usyk is, that undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The fact that a portion of the title was afforded to Dubois, to me, that's just business, politics, packaging. You've got to be listen, guys. If there are four different world champions in a particular weight division, like we have at lightweight, and they're all one of the four major, credible, widely accepted sanctioning bodies, then I have to afford a little bit of credence to each man. If they haven't fought each other and there's no more qualifying backstory, then I have to take each man's claim somewhat seriously. But I will not take a claim seriously when you unify the title, all of the damn championship. You bang the drum endlessly for months. We have one postponement before Fury and Usyk actually met initially on May the 18th in Saudi Arabia. You finally say this is once and for all done and dusted. The winner is the heavyweight champion of the world. Do not fucking go from there, literally weeks later, and tell me you're giving a belt away to somebody and upgrading a guy because because the champion, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, is unwilling to face him before he faces the man he beat in the initial undisputed championship fight, which was Tyson Fury. Does that make sense? It's not that I'm saying an IBF champion is not valid, and it's not that I'm failing to acknowledge that we've had this situation for the last 50 years in boxing, at least. What I'm saying is, don't you dare unify those titles in that manner with all the pomp and ceremony, and then tell me literally a few weeks later that another guy has got a portion of the fucking championship, because I'm not having that. I should probably stop swearing because that affects my monetization. Usually, when you curse or say something controversial, like when Takalo used the P word, related to racism that he'd experienced, they tend to put a little asterisk next to your video saying limited advertising opportunities. So let's keep it nice and 100. So, but Dubois, okay. I have it on very good authority that he was genuinely ill. And, what you're saying is, I won't tell you what he was going to get paid. I did hear today what he was going to get paid and what it's cost him and what it's cost his team. But what you were suggesting, anybody who suggests the fact that he was not ill and he just didn't want to fight Joseph Parker, he's given up millions of pounds. He is out of pocket. I think I could probably tell you, I think he's out of pocket about 50 grand for the training camp, something like that. And because these things cost money, especially at that level, you're paying for sparring partners, you're paying for training facilities, and for fighters need to pay their team. Some of these guys have physiotherapists and nutritionists and all the rest of it. Do they need them? Did Sugar Ray Robinson have them? Let's debate. Sugar Ray Robinson definitely didn't have them. Whether fighters really need that or whether there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, who could say? That's another debate for another show. But Dubois, there's no way on earth Dubois withdrew and faked an illness. He was examined by a British Boxing Board of Control doctor. I believe the problem initially was swollen glands. I have been led to believe, I have good reason to believe, he's had an issue with swollen glands previously in other camps. and he's managed to. Luckily, it happened earlier, and he's managed to shake off whatever was trying to attack him from outside his system, and he's gone ahead and fought. But no, he was taken on well a couple of days before the fight. He was examined by a British Boxing Board of Control doctor, and that doctor said, in my professional opinion, he should not fight on Saturday night. And so he didn't fight. He hasn't said anything. Some people are saying they're awfully quiet. Don Charles and Daniel Dubois are awfully quiet. Well, Don Charles told me he's not getting involved. He's not giving fuel to the fire of the lunatic fringe and the idiots. He said, because they will, whatever you say, they will hang you anyway on social media. So he says, if Frank Warren wants to talk, let Frank Warren talk. He's the promoter, he's the spokesman. Let him go ahead and explain the situation. But he said Daniel doesn't say much at the best of times, and he's not going to say anything himself. So I don't suppose anybody. I mean, I know I've got a small audience tonight, but I don't. It doesn't look like anybody's contradicting me at the minute, or anybody doesn't believe that Daniel Dubois was legitimately injured. But so what do we get? Initially we were reasonably after the disappointment of hearing that Dubois was out, we were reasonably excited even when Martin Bacoli stepped in as a substitute. A lot of people thought that was almost as good a fight. Some people said it was just as good a fight. Some people said, you know what, we might have even got a better fight now. Martin Bacoli, the much lauded bogeyman of the division, so-called, certainly in these social media ranks, painted by some as a latter-day Sonny Liston. Well, we've seen how that panned out, didn't we? It was a complete washout. Bacoli looked like someone at an unlicensed show who'd been picked out of the crowd, who put his gin and tonic down to get in the ring. And before anyone says, well, he'd only had 2 days' notice, what do you expect? And he did it for the financial incentive, and fair play to him. I'm not going to criticise him, but there is a difference, my friends, between not being fully fight fit because you weren't in camp, and there is not being fit to enter a ring against a world class heavyweight. My belief is that Martin Bacoli was not fit to enter the ring against a world class heavyweight in Joe Parker on Saturday night. You look at the way he got caught, right, and the way he fell. He felt like some doddery fuck who'd been picked out of the crowd. Now I know fighters, their facilities and legs can desert them when everything the messages get short circuited up there. But the way he felt to me, that was a classic case of not having the punch resistance because you're not fight fit and you can't take a shot from that guy, a shot that you probably would have shaken off if you'd have been in the zone and you'd have trained for 10 weeks or however long your favoured training camp might be. And I do feel, all right, so, we wanted for years as hardcore boxing fans who had plenty to complain about until recently, and I imagine there'll never be a world shortage of things that we find to complain about. But we used to complain that once you got a loss, you were dead and buried, and commercially, and we wanted to abolish that culture as best we can. We wanted to strike it from the narrative. So I'm not saying because Bacoli has stepped up to the plate and lost that he should be penalised for that, but I do think his brand has lost some of its lustre. It's impossible not to lose some of its lustre under those circumstances with that kind of ignominious nature of his loss to Parker on Saturday night. Having said that, if he really was the bogeyman and he was the guy that the top heavyweights didn't want to fight, maybe they will be more willing to accommodate him now. I thought he was going to fight F.A. Jagbar. I thought that's what he was training for in April 20. I thought it was April 25th, perhaps. But what I saw today on the usual channels was that Turki Al Sheikh has said, I'm still going to bring Bacoli back into a big fight in May. So in New York City, I think it will be. So regardless of that, I feel that Bacoli has lost a step with that, but at the same time, it might work out for him because when he's fit and ready, as long as it hasn't affected him psychologically, then perhaps he'll be in a better position when people fear him less. To use a term from my old sidekick, Michael Elijah Jr., he says there's blood in the water now. He always says that whenever a fighter, especially a vaunted fighter, suffers their first professional loss, he refers to the situation as being blood in the water, and now every shark is coming for you. So maybe that'll be the case. But listen. By the way, Bacoli said that he'd done nothing for 4 months after beating Jared Anderson and not trained at all. Billy Nelson supposedly said he'd been training, taking over for 6 weeks before entering camp for what was going to be his next fight before he got offered the last minute Parker job. And he said to Umar from Box Nation that he had done nothing. He said he'd just been on, literally done nothing but eat and hang out and chill for 4 months. Now, my value base is that no fighter should ever spend that long. No fighter should ever take 4 months off. You're a professional athlete, and your job and your livelihood and your legacy and just your fucking remit. Stop swearing, Ben. It's because I'm on my own. I just feel a bit like letting rip. This one's probably not going to generate all the money in the world, to be honest. Anyway, it's things like interviews with Terry Marsh that generate money on here, to be honest with you. But let's not talk about analytics. So nobody should be taking 4 months off. So really, as I say, I feel the public was a bit shortchanged on Saturday night because that man was not fit to enter the ring against Parker. Have I never seen a second round knockout before between two heavyweights or two guys of any weight when guys were fully trained and absolutely finely tuned? Of course I have. Could it still happen? Of course it could. Would it still have happened if he'd been fight fit? I doubt it, to be honest with you, but of course it could. But I think the public was a little bit shortchanged. They had the name of Martin Bacoli, but he was no force to be reckoned with Saturday night. What else? The best pure fight on the bill, guys. Feel free to say stuff more than ever. When I've got a guest and you fire up questions and you're all talkative, I often have to pass over some of your comments or questions because I am talking to the guest and I don't want to interrupt that flow. So it's a bit of a tightrope. Tonight, when I'm on my own, please feel free to comment away. Comment away, Taylor. Definitely shortchanged. You know Taylor Shaw's. Taylor Shaw's a pretty good boxer, actually. White collar, but he'd have probably had as good a chance as Martin McCauley, to be honest with you, because I'm pretty sure that Taylor has been taking better care of himself than Martin did. So, bit of a weight disadvantage, but according to the Silk, that doesn't matter. Can you see that I'm sticking it to the Silk, by the way, tonight? I love that guy, but he does my nutting. The Silk said it was a huge upset. As soon as Parker knocked him out, he went, "Wow, huge upset." And I said, no, it wasn't. I said the guy got 2 days' notice. He only arrived in the country at 2 a.m. that morning, and that was not an upset. And then I checked the odds, which I was already aware that Parker was a betting favourite. But you can't tell the Silk anything. I said a huge upset or any kind of upset is when the betting favourite loses. I said that Parker was the betting. He was like a 2-1 favourite, which is clear enough. And the caveat of the circumstances that the other guy had literally got off the plane, it was not a huge upset at all. But you cannot tell Silk will write a book, and he has done. I think I literally ignored the tags because I know there's no talking sense to him. He would write a book about how that was still a huge upset, and you almost doubt your sanity at times talking to people like that. But someone said to me, "Listen, Ben, don't even bother debating it. It's a fact. You are right. I'm a sports odds compiler. I'm a what they call it, a handicapper in America. They call it." He said, "That's what I do for a living. An upset is when the favourite loses. You are completely right, and he is completely wrong." So there you go. But I still love Michael Asilkalajide, and he is one rare piece of work. But he's a very interesting guy cerebrally, and some of his contrarianism does actually have profundity to it. Sometimes, one thing I respect about the Silk is he will not accept the narrative that everybody else peddles, and sometimes I think whether he's aware of it or not, and I suspect he's not, he tries too hard to go the other way. But to say that it wasn't. To say that it was a huge upset is just nonsense. Aidan, what are you saying? Interesting that the Crown Prince has not attended any fights. Also, even more interesting would be if he does attend, would he bring his wife with him? Yeah, I don't know who the Crown Prince is, Aidan. You know what's interesting? A few years ago, I think it was probably lockdown or thereabouts, that strange period in human history. I think it crossed over with lockdown. A friend of mine said to me, I've got these two guys who work for some kind of sports agency. They do a lot with American basketball players, but they've gotten in to the Saudi royal family and they want to try and put a really big show on over there, okay? And they're trying to get, could you get Anthony Joshua or Dylan White? At the time, Dylan was in line for a shot at Joshua. In the end, he ended up fighting Fury, as you know. He was offered a shot at Joshua when he had 3 belts. But he hung on for the Fury shot. But they were saying, if you can get this over the line, there was me and Spencer Fearon went to the meeting and they said, if guys, we can do this and we can all get consultancy fees of like 100 grand and all the rest of it. And for someone as broke as me, that was quite appealing. But they were saying all we need to do is if you guys can link AJ or Dylan or this and that. They were talking about putting on a big show in Saudi Arabia, and in the end, it didn't come together. But the initial Saudi Arabia show, I believe, was the big one. I mean, I know they had Billy Dib versus somebody. And Lukeman Prince Patel fought on the bill. Amir Khan versus Billy Dib. That's what they had that as a big show, didn't they? And they paid Amir Khan an exorbitant amount of money. I believe it was $7 million to fight over there. That was the first Saudi show that I recall. But the next the really first big Saudi show was the Duel in the Desert, which was the Anthony Joshua Andy Ruiz rematch. But what is interesting is people were talking to me and Spencer Fearon, having meetings, talking about this ground level of some Saudi boxing revolution. And obviously, you look at it now, and you can see that it happened. And you feel that you missed a trick because supposedly there was an opportunity for some of us to make money there, and now that ship has sailed. Crown Prince is Turkey's boss. He married his first cousin. Okay. It's interesting out there, isn't it? I haven't been there yet, guys. I could have applied for accreditation. Well, I don't know if I'd have got it, but I could have applied for accreditation for the show just gone on Saturday. But I was filming a movie Saturday and Sunday, so I couldn't go. I've committed to that. So that is that. But I am looking forward to getting out to Saudi Arabia and seeing what it's like firsthand. What we're saying, Joe, didn't Eubank fight over there in the 90s? Cairo, was it? Was it Cairo? Or United Arab Emirates of something? You know what? It might have been Saudi Arabia. I thought I remember some marketing material, Joe, where there were pyramids and sphinxes. I thought it was Cairo, Egypt. He might have fought in Saudi as well, maybe. Yeah. The fights in Saudi remind me of lockdown fights in terms of the atmosphere. It's a shame. It is, Aidan. But do you know what? You know what I'd say, Aidan? What do we want? Great fights like we saw, with Callum Smith and Joshua Buatsi, Dimitri Bivol and Artur Beterbiev, which I will get to discussing those. I'll give myself an hour tonight if you stay with me, guys. But do we want great fights? And again, with the best fighters in the world, some of them, and stacked bills that are almost emotionally draining because every fight after the two bona fide undercard fights, every fight was like a legitimate main event in its own right. They're almost a bit tiring, aren't they? But do we want that, Aidan, or do we want lesser shows with a bunch of pissed up, coked up wankers going, "Sweet Caroline, oh, oh, oh." You know what I mean? So, I know what you mean about atmosphere. Give me a Hagler Hearns atmosphere for sure. Give me a Leonard Hearns atmosphere. But I could probably live without the modern day Wembley atmosphere, to be honest with you. That's my take on it. That are we better off? You're right though, Aidan. They do seem evocative of the lockdown fights that we got, like the fight camp in Eddie Hearn's back garden. Tyson Douglas happened in silence. It did, Joe. It was eerie, wasn't it? Wasn't it? Wasn't that really strange and eerie? That Tyson, you're watching this shocking spectacle of the personification of invulnerability in the ring, getting dismantled in an atmosphere that sounds like a goddamn library. It was like chilling. It was really, really surreal. I'm old enough to have watched Tyson Douglas in real time on I mean, I know people who attended that fight, but I was watching it at a friend's flat in Richmond in the small hours of the morning. It was February 11th, 1990. I was 20 years old, and it was truly bizarre spectacle because it did happen in silence. Atmosphere is a valid point, but I've got the caveat. When you think of atmospheres today, sometimes I go to a boxing show nowadays at your call, and I'll be honest with you guys, right? You know what I think sometimes? Sometimes I think, what am I doing here? I hear idiots shouting rubbish, ignoramuses, football type fans, yobs, divvy birds sometimes. And there are times when I think, would I not be happier at the theatre or the opera? Or Wimbledon or something. You know what I mean? I've been to Wimbledon the last couple of years with my mother, and one thing I'll say is it's a much more civilized experience. I mean, come on, I love boxing, and I think sometimes I overdose on boxing, and I get a little tired. Sometimes, not often. Sometimes get a little weary that it's the only thing people ever want to discuss with me. But the thing is, I'm kind of hoist by my own petard, really, aren't I? Because it's my fault. It's my fault that people only want to talk to me about boxing. But it is nice sometimes to stimulate my mind with other subjects. Some people say, "Have you seen this interview? Have you seen that podcast? Oh, you'll like this, mate." And I'm like, "No, I won't. I want to watch something about I don't know. Give me a documentary about Paul Gascoigne or something. Even staying within the sporting framework. But you guys didn't tune in to hear me talk about non-boxing topics, so let's get back on track. Kings Hall, Belfast, the atmosphere. But you made a good point, Ben. Thank you, Aidan. The Kings Hall, Belfast was just amazing too, wasn't it? I think there were certain arenas, you know, associated with certain fighters, like the King's Hall with McGuigan being one of them, that were truly iconic. And it was almost like something you couldn't recreate. Matthew Hilton, when he fought, I'm trying to think where he fought Wilfred Benitez. It was a hall in Quebec. I can't remember what the arena was called, but it was almost like the Barry McGuigan kind of furore and that kind of intensity. Tony Ayala Jr. at the Freeman Coliseum or the Municipal Auditorium was like a bear pit in the 1980s when Tony Ayala Jr. fought. I think we can, because I don't mind that. I don't mind the idea of something really feral and savage, like you think your life might end any second. I just don't like the more kind of middle of the road matchroom casual kind of brand, really. But what are we saying? Bruce Gas, Bruce Gas, boxing, jazz, and more. How you doing, Bruce? Bruce is a very loyal guy, and he's obviously friends with Joe because they always acknowledge each other. But I appreciate you guys being on this podcast, watching me and whoever else is on here. Come what may, rain or shine, regardless of when I decide to roll in the week, because I haven't done any for a little while. We missed the weekend. Friday night, I was out on a date, which was wonderful. Thanks for asking. You didn't. And Sunday night, I was at a movie premiere and such. Gary Stretch was really good, by the way. Can I say a few words about that? Gary Stretch, new movie, Wheels of Heaven. Mickey Rourke playing the nominal lead is Mickey Rourke, but I think the real lead is Gary, effectively. It was a decent movie, quirky, different. I don't want to give too much away, but Gary plays this horrible, no good villain in it, and he plays it really well. Gary is a fine actor, and I hope he continues to get. He's been doing. I mean, he's not new to the game, and he's done some big things. But I hope Gary gets something else big off the back of that because I think it was a great role, and he's going to get a lot of plaudits for it. So that was that. What else we got, guys? What we want to talk about? We will talk about the main event at the end. That makes sense, right? But Boatsy versus Callum Smith, I think, was the best pure fight of the night. I'll be interested in your. Which fight did you guys enjoy the most? For me, Boatsy versus Smith, which pretty much kicked off the main part of the card. That was just a brilliant fight. Back and forth. I was surprised a little bit that Callum Smith won. He proved me wrong. I'd picked Boatsy ahead of time. I do feel there is something a bit workmanlike about Boatsy. Like he's lacking that little bit of urgency and passion sometimes. And Smith fully deserved the verdict, and it was just a great fight. The monster fights in Japan take place in an interesting atmosphere. Yeah, and did you know Junto Nakatini today, Aidan, beat? He walked through. What was the guy's name? I'm trying to think what the other guy was called. Caleras or something. It began with a C. I ought to know. It's a bit remiss of me, but Quailas, I think it was something like that. But he walked through the guy in 3 rounds, and the really is building momentum now for a Japanese super fight between Junto Nakatini, the WBC bantamweight champion, and Naoya Inoue, the undisputed super bantamweight champion of the world. There's a lot of options for Inoue, right? There's a lot of options for him about moving up to featherweight. I think some of the intrigue amongst boxing fans around Inoue is this question of how far can he go? Where is the cap on Inoue's ability and power? At what point will be a step too far for him in terms of weight divisions? Could he go as far as, because people were talking about Tank Davis and Inoue, weren't they? Which I'm not too sure about that one. Tank Davis, of course, fights on March the 1st, this Saturday at the Barclays Centre in Brooklyn against Lamont Roach. But we will talk about that later. What was a cracker? A very hard punishing fight for both. That's what David Evans, Border Control Whip, says. Yeah, it was a fantastic fight, and David, I think it was the best fight of the entire bill. What else haven't I covered? Madrimov versus Ortiz. I thought it was an interesting affair. Some people were disappointed in it. I thought it was a good, technical, decent fight. It wasn't the sort of thing I wanted to take my eyes off. initially it looked, I fancied Madrimov, and I had actually picked him to win. I got 4 out of 7, by the way, of the big 7. My friend Leroy Nicholas got 6.5 because he picked Shiraz. So the draw, I give him half rather than 6 out of 7. So he did the best of anybody that I know. But I picked 4 out of 7 on the night, which is how it should be. It doesn't make you any less of a or any more of an expert. We shouldn't be able to pick fights all the time, no matter how knowledgeable we are. Okay, so um, Madrimov. Madrimov's got a funny style, and he's got. They call it Soviet style, but there's almost a bit of something else, a bit looser limbed and more Cuban or something about it too. And there is actually a Soviet Cuban crossover in the amateurs, as unlikely as it sounds. I believe there is a coaching crossover to some degree, and they certainly used to be, and probably still are, the two leading amateur boxing superpowers. But Madrimov feints with everything. You can feint with your hands, you can feint with your shoulders, you can feint with your feet. You know, when you jump in and jump out, you can feint with lots of things. But Madrimov feints with his whole body. The hands feint. He leans forward with the torso and feints. He does the foot feint, and he's very, very awkward and hard to time. And obviously Ortiz was patient and sort of figured him out, over the long route, because initially it looked like Madrimov could run away with that fight, and that Ortiz was never going to quite get the feel of him and never going to quite catch fire. But in the end, his pressure told, and he closed that gap, to use Richie Woodall's favourite phrase. I like Richie Woodall a lot, but commentary wise, I think it would be good, maybe just maybe, to let someone else have a go now, and let's hear some new phrases. Let's just hear some other more stuff, except for close the gap, maintain the gap. Oh, he's on the back foot, he's on the front foot. It's just I shouldn't be really saying this because I'm not trying to make enemies in the world, and I do like Richie, and I've asked him for pictures at least once. And so why should you do that and come on your own show and say, "Oh, I wish he'd get fired"? I'm not saying that, but I don't know. I think I would like to see Richie Woodall change it up a little bit. Who beat Espana? Yeah. Which Espana are we talking about, Joe? Trying to follow that. Expecting a bit more from Madrimov, says David. Yeah, maybe so, because at some point you've got to impose yourself, which is what Bivol did, right, David? Rather than being too cautious and safety minded and moving too much, he stood his ground. I like the phrase, talking about Bivol, okay, making the adjustments. I like the phrase that US boxing analyst Frank Lotierzo used when he said, Bivol emptied the wagon every time it got tough. Every time he was cornered or every time he had to stand still, he emptied the wagon. I think that's a great way of. It's a great image to describe the way Bivol fought. But yeah, so Ortiz remains unbeaten. There's a lot of big fights out there for him. I've seen old trainers teaching boxers who rock back and forth. Yeah, rock back and forth on the spot. Yeah, Kung, that is definitely something that happens. Yeah, which is, to me, that is actually the true meaning of the back foot thing, is when you've got your weight on here, like, you could actually rock backwards like this. It's this back foot here. I'm doing the best I can from a sitting position on a podcast, but it's the back foot where your weight is, which is truly the meaning for me of back foot boxing. And if you want to go forward, you've actually got to push off that back foot. So that is the big misnomer that some people don't seem to be aware of. That's why I avoid the term back foot in its most common usage. Glenn Catley, Richie Woodall is a true sportsman. Acknowledge Glenn Catley beat him. He did. You've got to hand it to him for that, because fighters hardly ever admit when they lost, even when they got a gift, they got a squeeze. Richie Woodall is one of the few I can remember who did it at the time. Sugar Ray Leonard did it afterwards. Years later, he said that Tommy Hearns beat him the second time, which I'm not entirely sure about. I think people call me mad or just, in love with Sugar Ray Leonard, and I plead guilty. But I thought the Leonard Hearns draw was not as outrageous as other people thought it was, because Ray battered him from pillar to post in 2 of those rounds, which were a bit like Tommy's knockdown rounds. There just wasn't an official knock. There just wasn't actually a knockdown. So, I'm not too sure about that. I have Len Woodall's boxing tutorial DVDs, yeah, and I'm sure they're interested in a great source. Yeah. And Richie Woodall is very textbook. He is very by the book, So he talks about distance all the time. He talks about the front foot and the back foot, and he talks about the gap all the time. Maybe he could get a job on the London Underground, that Mind the Gap gig. That'd be a good one. I might get Richie Woodall a T-shirt saying Mind the Gap. You get them from those London tourism shops, just as a playful joke. What can I say? What else? Let's work our way up the bill. We've spoken about Joshua Buatsi versus Smith. We've spoken about Madrimov. We've spoken about Bacoli and Parker. What else? We've spoken about Shiraz, Caballero, and Zhang. I did pick Caballero. That was one of the picks I got successfully correct. I fancied him to be younger and fresher. There was something about, obviously, Zhang was canonised off the back of those back-to-back wins over Joe Joyce, which were very impressive and devastating. Well, the second one was. But I fancied Caballero somewhat, and he suffocated him, didn't he, with pressure. It was an inspired game plan. I'm going to go to the mountain and back him up. I'm going to bash him around the body, and I'm just going to break his heart. So you can't fault Caballero for that. He was busier. He boxed at a range where Zhang found it hard to be effective, and he hit him in the guts plenty until the guy just couldn't continue. There's always something impressive about seeing a huge mountainous man like that capitulate, and that was one of those things. I like Ray Leonard, but he's a divisive character amongst boxing fans. He is, but I think most people love him now, Kung. And you know what else, Kung? If you ask most professional boxers who their favourite fighter is or who they would most like to be, if you could be like any boxer and you could have his gifts and attributes, whose attributes would you choose to have? I'm willing to bet you that most of them would say Sugar Ray Leonard. They always used to say it. Boxing News used to have that 60-second interview format in their publication at the back in the old days. I don't know if they still do it now because I don't read Boxing News anymore. If anybody's curious as to precisely why, I could discuss that on another show. It's not anything to do with the personal grudge, by the way. It's just literally I fell out of love with reading Boxing News. But they used to have a 60-second interview, and they would say favourite all-time fighter, and more fighters named Ray Leonard than anybody else. Marvin Hagler and Mike Tyson were other popular choices, but more fighters named Sugar Ray Leonard than anybody. What was the cause of Daniel Dubois' illness? No, it wasn't heartitis. I spoke about that before you arrived, Joe. Honest to God, Dubois had an infection. He had swollen glands, and the British Boxing Board of Control doctor told him he couldn't fight. Trust me on that, Joe. He's not giving up millions of pounds for that. People are saying, "Oh, he doesn't want to ruin the Usyk fight." You're only fighting for money anyway. You're already getting money. You didn't get paid, for God's sake. You fight for money. You don't not fight when you're getting all that money. It doesn't make sense. What are you trying to protect? You're shot against Usyk for what? For more money? How much money do you need? He did. He didn't. No, he didn't. Yeah, exactly that. I'd like to be Leon Spinks. His wife said he was hung like a horse. Is that what Brenda Spinks said? His wife was called Brenda, right? Funny, Leon Spinks was arrested, I believe, 6 times in his first 6 months. Well, his only 6 months as world heavyweight champion. He got arrested at least half a dozen times in the 6 months he had the title. He had it from February to September, right? And he was hanging around it wearing blue fox fur coats and the whole pimp hat and rolling with an entourage in a limousine or Cadillac. I think it was probably a Cadillac. And they were, drinking and drugging and balling. I don't know if they called it balling in 1978. But he was stopping at a gas station once, and this guy was blown away by all the women, the Cadillac car, and the blue fox furs that Leon was wearing, and the way he just gave the guy at the gas station a big tip. And the kid who was pumping the gas said, "Geez, mister, what do you do for a living?" And Leon Spinks is said to have said, "I knock mothers out." Which my dad thought was really funny, because if you say that in an English accent, he's like, "I knock mothers out," which was the way my dad chose to say it, because he said, "Yeah, it's nice work if you can get it, knocking mothers out." That was Leon Spinks. What are we saying? He ended up broken down and destitute with alcohol issues. He did, but in later years, I think he was working. I think he might have ended up working at McDonald's, which I think he was a security guard at McDonald's, by the way, not a burger flipper. So I think in the end he did straighten himself out and get over the addiction issues, and I think he did have a regular job, which you may think it's a lowly destination for a former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, and I would agree with you. But it could be worse, it's better than being in a crack house somewhere. But yeah, he did have CTE, as many of them do, Him him and Michael were quite a contrast as far as brothers go. They were, I think, because Michael seemed so much more kind of studious and sensible, whereas Leon seemed wild, impulsive, and unstable. And Michael was also a much, much greater fighter. They were both Olympic gold medalists. Michael wasn't as innocent as he acted. Interesting there. You could feel free to expand on that if you like, Joe. So I've talked about Zhang and Caballel. So we've done Zhang Caballel, we've done Smith Boatsy, we've done Bacoli Parker, Shiraz versus Adames. What else have I not discussed? Madrimov versus Ortiz Jr. That only leaves me 2 fights, right? There's the main event, which I want to get to. What am I missing? What am I missing, guys? What fight have I not named? Oh, Shakur Stevenson versus late-minute sub who covered himself in glory, Joshua Padley. There's not much I can say about that, is there, really? There's not a lot I can say about it. He was a bartender. That's Leon Spinks, I imagine. Cheers, Bruce. He was interviewed by Trish Dixon towards the end of his life, yeah. Good old Trish. Stevenson versus Padley. Thank you, Kung. I beat you to it in terms of I got the comment in before you said it, but I don't doubt that you said it before I said it. Yeah, there's nothing I can really say about that unless anybody has any questions pertaining to that fight. We knew it was a big class gap. I thought Joshua Padley's attitude was wonderfully positive. I thought he was very ballsy, great effort, really upbeat, gutsy, just a great effort. And he could obviously, like I say, he didn't find Shakur to be a hugely hard puncher, which we know he isn't. Certainly not known as a huge puncher. And if you're not a huge puncher, you take a guy out with body shots. That's what you do. That's how you. If you can't take a man out clean, or you don't trust yourself to do that, then you bang him downstairs. Especially if you're a surgeon and a technician like Shakur Stevenson clearly is. And that's the way it went down. Turkey paid off Hadley's mortgage, which was cool. Exactly that. Yeah, that's what I heard. That I heard he paid off the mortgage. And I mean, what can you imagine? Everybody said he was doing an electrician job with Jason Cunningham. I think in the morning or the afternoon, and the phone rang saying, "Listen, will you fight Shakur Stevenson on Saturday? Don't worry, we'll pay your mortgage off, and we'll give you a nice chunk of change on top of that." You'd be like, "Bloody right, I will." And I think he ain't going to be working as an electrician anymore. I don't think, from what I understand. So, what do I think of Hadley making 135 on 2 days' notice? Where in his last fight, yeah, it was like, well, good question, Bruce. Valid question. Because he's a light welterweight, right? He was expecting a fight with Dalton Smith, right? He was expecting a fight with Dalton Smith. And next minute they said, well, all I can say is he made it, didn't he? And he didn't. Did he? He didn't blame it on weight drained factor. He said that I didn't have the conditioning in my body downstairs really to ship that sort of punishment ongoing. He said, I probably in 4 days' notice obviously wasn't enough to attain that, like Martin McCauley, who wasn't able to condition his temples well enough, in that kind of time frame that he had. But Josh Padley has gained lots of friends with that performance. Shakur, some people were saying he was being disrespectful, but I did see that he said a nice thing about him on Twitter yesterday, and I think Shakur's in Britain right now. I think he's in the UK, probably London. And because he said, "I just landed in the UK. Where's my boy Josh Padley at? Let's go." He said, "Let's go get a section and party." So he was. I'll have to chase that up because if I could get a chance, maybe to interview Shakur while he's here, that would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? But I know some of you were saying that he was disrespectful. Personally, I didn't really see that. I just saw him saying some gracious things on Twitter. Really entertaining though. So White versus Teto was pretty farcical, yeah, but entertaining though. Who's Parker fight next? The winner of White versus Joyce for us. You know what? I think Parker at this point surely will be looking to manoeuvre himself. I would think he will either want the Dubois fight, which will have the IBF title on the line, whether I like it or not. I don't run boxing. I've just got this little tiny corner of the world where I have a handful of fairly devoted fans who like to listen to what I have to say. Let's not get it twisted. So the fact that I hate the situation, I'm trying not to go with that narrative. If he fights Dubois, if they reschedule it, the IBF title will be on the line. Even though, as far as I'm concerned, only one man deserves the title, world heavyweight champion. But I would think he will want the Dubois fight, or else he'll want a Usyk fight. And I think the Usyk Parker fight is very sellable. Makes a lot of sense. I'm aware that Usyk has been talking about fighting Dubois, but if I was Parker, I wouldn't want another fight against one of these guys. You know, because you've got to hand it to Parker. I mean, he knew the guy didn't have a camp, but you have to hand it to Parker for agreeing to someone as vaunted as Bacoli on 2 days' notice. He didn't appear to bat an eyelid, and just said, "All right, fair go, mate." I think it's Australians who talk like that, actually, not Parker. But yeah. So I would think Parker will want a big fight next time. I mean, there's an Anthony Joshua angle, isn't there? Maybe Anthony Joshua, who obviously looked woeful last time out in September against Dubois. I mean, it wasn't just that he got knocked out; it was the way he looked just like a deer caught in the headlights, quite honestly. But there's an angle there, for a revenge angle there as well, for Parker and Joshua. Maybe they can run with that. I saw something in the Daily Mirror today, or just a post that someone had shared, that Fury is considering retirement. Well, shock horror, Sorry, Fury is considering coming out of retirement to fight Anthony Joshua, which I think we knew that already. His last fight against Chamberlain, he was 1-3-9. Yeah, exactly that, Bruce. It kind of been, you know what? I wonder what he weighed, Bruce, on the day he was doing the electrician's job, which was 4 days before the fight, wasn't it? I think he came on Tuesday, didn't he? You know what's interesting, by the way? Shakur told Eddie Hearn that guy, Floyd Schofield, will not fight me. And then he turns up at the press conference, and Eddie's like, well, he's here. He said, he will not fight me. And then he turns up in Saudi Arabia. He lands, and he goes to the press conference. And Eddie said to Shakur, he's here. And Shakur apparently said to Eddie, trust me, he will not fight. He will not get in the ring. He was absolutely adamant about that, and he didn't. He didn't. What's my opinion of us saying he'll have 2 more bouts, Dubois and this MMA fella? Well, obviously, I'm sure you could guess my reaction to the MMA guy, or my lack of interest in it. Do you know what? If Usyk wants a show fight, a crossover fight, so be it. It holds no interest to me, but so be it. Dubois, yeah. I think because the angle for me, ignoring the belt situation, the angle for me is that there was the controversy with whoever, whichever side of the fence you're on that one. There was a controversy in the fight they had in Poland in 2023, and that would be good to resolve that situation, because I think Usyk's superiority was quite evident, except for that crisis moment with was it low or wasn't it a low blow? Feel free to tell me now. We haven't spoken about it for a while. Feel free to tell me what your take on that was. I happen to think it was a low blow. Don Charles begs to differ with me. Ross Amber begs to agree with me, and certainly does. The Silk doesn't agree with me. Can't remember what Gary thought. Gary was supposed to be on tonight, by the way, but it doesn't look like he's coming. Never mind. He's probably celebrating. I prefer to see Dubois next, and either Parker or Caballero or a Swan Song. Yeah. Yeah, and Caballero, there's a nice, live young body in the contender coming up, so there's one. That leaves it with the main event, fellas. My timing isn't bad tonight. We're 48 minutes in, and I want to talk about the main event briefly. Full disclosure, because I had a date Friday night, and I stayed up very late. I don't drink it. I don't know who doesn't know it, but I've been sober for getting on for 8 years. I do not drink alcohol, but I did, and I don't normally stay up past midnight ever, and haven't done for years now. But I did go out with a young lady in it doesn't matter, in London town on Friday night, and because of that I only got 4 hours sleep on that night. So then I had to go do some filming for the movie Ron Barrow, where I'm playing the Gypsy King type figure, and because of that, by the time the main event came on, which was about 11 p.m. UK time, I was really tired, and my focus was not quite sharp for the last 6 rounds of Better Bivol 2. I stayed up, heard the results, posted quickly an acknowledgement of it on Facebook, as I had to do, and then I went to sleep. I just went out like a light. So I need a rewatch of that fight. Well, for 2 seconds, we're brothers in sobriety, Kung. You're 8 years almost from 2017. Fantastic, mate. That was when 23. Bruce, you know how many? It's amazing how many great people in recovery it's our superpower, isn't it? You know, there's always, I can throw a stick in any good environment like tonight, and I'll hit a couple of sober people with that stick. What's Julian McGowan saying? It was low in accordance with the rules of boxing. Yeah, yeah. You see, here's another one for you while you're here, Julian, because I don't know how long you've been listening for. The Silk said Parker Bacoli was a huge upset. I'm trying to drum some sense into his pretty little skull. I tried to explain to him that Parker was the betting favourite, and the other guy only had 2 days' notice and only arrived at the fight, in the venue or the city the fight was happening at 2 a.m. on the morning of the fight, 2 a.m. on the day of the fight. And I'm trying to explain to him that it was not a huge upset because the favourite won in style. Maybe it was that people were surprised by the nature of the win, and in fact it went as quickly as it did. But it was not a huge upset. But you cannot tell the Silk that. You just cannot tell him. He's already written 99 theses on it since Sunday, tagging me in every one of them. The man is relentless. Was ludicrous like a balloon. Yeah, I still love the herb though. Yeah, I know. Listen, Bruce, I know a few people who practice recovery like that. Um, I don't know many, and most people will consider it a relapse. If I was to smoke a joint, which for me that was never my thing. I was never into marijuana. Honest to God, never into it. So it wouldn't be a thing for me. It wouldn't be a dilemma of any sort. But I know a couple of people who got sober who were really bad on the liquor and the Charlie, and they still smoke weed and they're okay. They have serenity and their life is okay. So, it's, I suppose, when we go to AA and we do a chair, we are said to share our experience, strength, and hope. I guess in your case, it's more like experience, strength, and dope. Forgive me for that one. Um, not to be, I'd not even have put a tenner on Bacoli at 100 to 1. So please tell the Silk he's an idiot. Signed with love from Ben. I hope he doesn't see this. Is because not because I'm worried about his reaction. I just don't want the pushback because Silk will go forever, and at some point I'll be like, okay, fine. Black is white, the sun is the moon, Orthodox is southpaw, and the jab is not important, and all the rest of it. Complete and total abstinence. Yeah, I've not put. What else are you guys saying? Macaulay was severely sleep deprived. He was, yeah, and right down to as if he couldn't get anything else more wrong. Apparently, according to Umar, I've come to people who saw the pictures. He was wearing really tight clothes on the aeroplane, and people said the whole thing is you you wear loose fitting clothes on an aeroplane on a long haul flight because you'll be more comfortable. If you're wearing tight clothes, you're just giving yourself another potential niggle when you get in the ring with Joseph Parker a matter of hours later. So, guys, I've told you that I didn't have the best eye. I watched the rest of the card good. I did. I watched all of Bivol Beterbiev, but it literally was one of the things where my eyes were shut in a couple of times. So I have to acknowledge that before giving some big loud opinion on the thing. I think what I enjoyed seeing was that Bivol had made the adjustments. He knew, like the potentially great fighter he is, he knew he had to do something different, and last time wasn't good enough. He took that on board and he stepped up to the plate of producing more than he did last time. He threw more punches, with kind of obvious, but sometimes you have to up that work rate. He still had the same kind of game plan geographically in terms of he was moving and taking Beterbiev on a journey, letting him come to him. But he threw more punches and he shouldn't trade it when he had to. And Julian McGowan scored it 16 or 116, 113. That's good enough for me as well. I've very seldom disagreed with Julian about anything boxing related. There's been a couple of things, but it's very, very little over a lot of years now. We're talking about well over 10 years we've known each other, and I very seldom disagree with Julian on any matter at all. Not like the Silk, eh? But Coley hadn't even sparred in 6 months. He'd have beaten nobody, top 20, Yeah, I think we can put that to bed. So, I was the only reason I didn't want Bivol to win it was because of my friendship with Iceman John Scully, who is an integral part of Artur Beterbiev's team. I like Scully; he's a fantastic guy. We call him the patron saint of boxing. He does so much work and good work for retired fighters in need. So you don't want a mate's fighter to lose, but at the same time, Bivol would constitute a Bivol win, would constitute more the triumph of my boxing worldview and my preference stylistically. So the fighter I preferred won. The fighter whose style I preferred. That personally, in terms of personality and nature and character, I like them both equally a lot. But in terms of boxing personality, my favourite is Bivol. So I'm glad he won. I'm also glad because it means we get to see it a third time, almost certainly, more than likely. And I think those it's the kind of pairing which would always produce that kind of fight. A mouth-watering, technical, exciting, back and forth light heavyweight championship fight. So what's not to love? We still have an undisputed champion of the world at 175, and I might be interested as we close this one out in some of your views of the fight, because as I say, I'm phoning it in a little bit because I was so tired. It finally caught up with me by the time the main event came on. I said a little earlier, it's not a negative, but the only caveat about these Saudi mega shows is that they're quite draining, aren't they? They're a bit tiring, but the hell with that. I'm never going to complain. It's like people who complain about the weather. They complain when it rains and it's cold and windy every day and piss poor in Britain, let's say, for months on end. And then when the summer comes, they're like, oh, it's too hot for me. I'm not going to say it's too hot for me. It ain't a half hot, mum, any of that. I'm not complaining about Turkey giving us these stacked shows. And was it the greatest card in boxing history? No. But it was one hell of a show. And I think we live in exciting times. Any of these old narratives that we used to use to express our dissatisfaction with the modern game, that doesn't apply anymore. We are in the middle of a revolution. Where is it going? Where will it end? I don't know. But we are in the middle of a boxing revolution. And I think these are exciting times. I got an invite today for the press conference on Thursday, London press conference for Conor Benn and Eubank Jr. So I will go along to that. I will try to get you guys some content. Something I would like to explain for people who might not know, there's two content streams on this channel. There's videos where you get all the interviews that I do out and about, and there is lives, which is these ones that you're watching now. If ever you want to watch a back episode of this, go to lives. They're all in here. If ever you want to watch an interview with Terry Marsh or Lawrence Okoli or Ben Shalom or Eddie Hearn or anybody else I've got hold of, go to the video content thing. The live column is all the podcasts, which is this. You can also listen to them on Spotify. Just type in The Hardest Game with Ben Doughty. You get the Spotify things. If you think I've got a face for radio, you could listen to the show instead of watch it. I personally think most of you will stay with this format. That's what I believe. That's a great idea, Taylor. What did Taylor just say? What did Taylor... Would you ever do a live watch on to a fight? Yes, Taylor. Yeah, we did it. You know what, Taylor? We did that with Joshua. I think it was Joshua Ngannou. Was Joshua Ngannou? Was that the one where we had? We also had Wardley versus Clark. Maybe that was a different watch along. You know what? We did two watch alongs. I think we did Joshua Ngannou. I'm pretty sure we did, and we did a watch along for Wardley. Fabio Wardley versus Fraser Clark won. So I can do watch alongs for sure. Absolutely. Enjoy it while our British temperate climate. Indeed. Check out who fought on the Chavez Horgan Villas, a who's who. That was a great Don King card of the 1990s. But also, Joe, while we're on it, the Larry Holmes Ernie Shavers rematch in 1979, which was a classic in itself. That also on the undercard had Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Wilfredo Gomez, and Michael Dokes versus James Tillis. That to me was the only thing I will say. It's not in terms of legends and talent on the card. Holmes Shavers supersedes it, yes. But these fights, the point is, these were great fights, weren't they? Some of them turned out to be great fights in actuality. Some of them were great matchups on paper, and you can't really blame the matchmakers or anybody else for Dubois' withdrawal. Floyd Schofield would have probably produced, one would think, a more competitive fight, you would hope, against Shakur Stevenson. But once again, that was nobody's fault. And if it was, I don't want to get into all the conspiracy theories that have been floated around. But these were great fights, weren't they? They were like main events. Sugar Ray Leonard versus Andy Price. Yeah, that could have been a main event. But Roberto Duran versus whoever he fought on that bill, and Wilfredo Gomez versus whoever he fought, they were ticking over fights. That is the difference. So while you're never going to likely to see a bill today that's got the talent of Larry Holmes, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard and Larry Holmes on there, because they were just a stone cold all-time greats, there's more to a great card than the names on it, right? That is a point I would like to make. Love you, Ben, but the fight you just mentioned, I wasn't mentioned of all. So I'm trying to understand this comment. Julian it says, "Love you, Ben," but the fight you just mentioned, it wasn't mentioned at all. I'm not following that for some reason. I don't know what that pertains to. Not one boxing fan mentioned or has mentioned the show to me. No, you're right. This is the thing, David. There's still trade fights. Somebody said, because someone said to me, "Would you call Majimov versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. a great trade fight, the trade fight of the night?" And I said, "Well, they're all trade fights, aren't they? Because even Beterbiev versus Vivol is a trade fight. It's a trade super fight, like Pryor versus Arguello was a trade super fight. And I would say that Pryor versus Arguello was a bigger trade super fight. Leonard versus Hearns and Hagler versus Hearns and Holmes versus Cooney were super fights, bona fide. So was Dempsey versus Carpentier and Lewis versus Schmeling 2 and Johnson versus Jeffries and Ali versus Fraser 1, 2, and 3. But it's a niche audience, isn't it? It's still a niche audience. Eubank Junior versus another guy. Oh yeah, I get you. Yeah, I I just got it. Yeah, I just got your context, Julian. I'll be going along there. I think I could maybe achieve something interviewing Conor Benn. I quite enjoy talking to Eubank Junior. I think he's quite a cool guy, actually. I know my mate Billy Joe never liked him, but I seem to. I've only done one or two interviews with Junior, but we had an okay rapport, so I will try to do it again on Thursday. Conor Benn, I'll have a go. If I get one, I fully expect, or I entertain the possibility that it won't happen because I think obviously sometimes you have to wait behind the so-called big hitters, and you don't get what you wanted to get. Sometimes I'm just not pushy enough at these things. I'm waiting a little bit cool because here's the thing, Julian. Right? I've interviewed, as you know, some greats of the game, so I refuse to scramble for Conor Benn or for Ben Whittaker and mug myself off, I just don't feel like I could do that. Whereas some people, when they say, "Oh, well, you should have got that, you should have jumped in there," and I'll say my ego rising a bit. I'll say I've interviewed Sugar Ray Leonard, mate. I'm all right. And they'll be like, "Yeah, but you shouldn't be like that. You've got to stay humble. You've got to stay humble in it because I think maybe they're right. I'm not pushy enough, and I don't. What I should do if I decide to go to these things, I should admit that I'm there and I'm going to try and get the best amount of work done, rather than thinking, well, I once interviewed Sugar Ray Leonard a very long time ago. But I think you can extrapolate what you wish from that rather jumbled, confusing statement. But I'm going anyway, and I will interview whoever I can, including the protagonists in the main event if I can. FUCK humble, exactly. I don't feel I said much about Beterbiev Bivol, considering it was a main event, except for the fact that they're two fine gladiators. Another compelling fight. Some people might not have agreed with the result last time. Some people might not have agreed with the result this time. I think one is a fair reflection of their wonderful dynamic in the ring, and it seems fitting that there should be a decider. And I think it will be as captivating as the previous two have been. Last comment. I don't like Ben Whittaker initially. Didn't like him initially. I said when he was an amateur, but the way he behaved after losing the Olympic final put me off him. Yeah, I wondered how to take that, Kung, because the fact that he said means nothing to me. Silver means nothing to me. Second place means absolutely nothing to me. And he was kind of just in a huff. To me, that did impress me to a degree that he had a winner's mindset because it showed you he wasn't willing to settle for anything other than the absolute pinnacle, the gold, which shows a lot of self belief and it shows a lot of ambition. Whittaker suffers from a superiority complex. Yeah, you do get people like that, Julian. You do get people. I haven't made a judgment on him. I would quite like to interview Whittaker as well. I interviewed Cameron briefly at the press conference a couple of weeks ago, and he's very, very everyman, unassuming. Just a really, I mean, people. It's a cliche to say someone's really down to earth, but he's incredibly grounded. Liam Cameron doesn't think he's anything special. He's just some lad who's doing his thing and doing all right at the minute. I would quite like to do an interview with Ben Whittaker just to see what sort of dynamic that that he has in the flesh. Porky, what were we talking about? Sorry, Paddy Barnes. I nearly mentioned Porky then. I thought someone mentioned Porky's Corner. He didn't. Paddy Barnes was the same about a bronze. Yeah, it was. It was unsporting. Yeah, no, true. And sometimes you've got to be sporting. For instance, he's a Christian as well. For instance, in closing, because I'm trying to get out of here, it's a Monday night. I just want to chill. It's been a long day. Jack Catterall was very classy, I thought, because you can make noises with your mouth, move your lips and make noises, but it's about the sincerity. It's also about what you say afterwards, because Larry Holmes was really gracious in the ring when he lost to Michael Spinks, when he was gutted that he was about to go 49-0, and then he loses to Michael Spinks of all people. Not that he wasn't a great fighter, but he was. That was Gary Stretch trying to call me. He can't call me yet because of the thing. But Larry said he's a good champion, and that's the way it goes, and all the rest of it. Then obviously he got on a famous rant after he said that in the press conference. He said, "You really want to get technical about it? Rocky Marciano couldn't have carried my jockstrap," and he insulted the family, or he upset the family, and all the rest of it. So, but Jack Catterall was very classy the other night. He just said, "Yeah, he deserved it more than I did. I really didn't shine tonight. And what can you say? But no, I'll be right back to it." And I thought Jack Catterall was honest to goodness, decent, and a complete absence of sour grapes. There's a complete absence of sour grapes with me as well, despite the fact Gary Stretch did not show up tonight. I'm going to call him now and ask what the bloody problem was. But, Gary's a busy man. He's a movie star. Guys, thank you for your continued support of the channel. Feel free to like and share the videos. Tell your friends to subscribe. As I say, the best content we've done recently in terms of traction and monetization was the Terry Marsh interview. I'm hoping Terry wants to do a follow-up because we still have things to talk about. I will be back later in the week with another live podcast version of The Hardest Game. Look out for content after Thursday's press conference. Love you all. Peace out.